At this point, I'm going to hand it off to Chris Murray, who's going to start us off in 3ds Max, and then from there we'll be moving on to Mudbox, Maya, and Motion Builder.
Great, thanks, Sean. Hi, I'm Chris Murray. I'm a technical marketing specialist for Autodesk. I specialize in 3ds Max, and we're going to be taking a look at some of the workflows that were used to create Space Madness. I've got the concept art for Sven up here. Sven's our main character. We're going to start off in 3ds Max. We're going to move over to Mudbox. We're going to try a couple of different things. And I just kind of want to revisit some of the things that have made 3ds Max one of basically the world-class modeling application that it is today. We're going to look at some of those best-in-class features, some of my favorite features that I like to use. So let's go ahead and jump right in. We're going to start off by taking a look at an early-stage version of Sven. And we're modeling, we're beginning to fill out some of the topology of Sven's character. You can see we have a very rough texture in there, just painted, just to kind of demonstrate what our straps are going to look like. We have some polygons going on in there. It's really kind of early stage in the model. The model needs to be refined. So I want to go ahead and use some of my favorite polygonal tools to do that. Max has always been known as one of the strongest polygonal modelers out there, and there's definitely a reason why. So I'm going to start off by using our Swift Loop tool. Swift Loop is a great tool that allows us to quickly add topology to our model, especially if it's a quad-based mesh like we have here. So I'm just going to go in and using the feedback loop that we can see there on my mouse, I'm going to start dropping in some topology here. We get instant feedback as to where the loops are that we're going to add. So it takes a lot of the guesswork out and leaves a lot of creative control for the artist. So I'm going to just drop some in there. We've added a couple of things in there. Now I'm going to kind of take a look at the side profile view of Sven's arm here. We can see we definitely need some loops in here. So I'm going to pop in some loops there, pop in a couple of there, and you can see that even though we've added the loops, it hasn't really solved our topology problem in terms of we're adding density to the model, but we need to actually add some curvature to that as well to kind of indicate volume. So for that, I'm going to use another one of my favorite tools called Set Flow. Set Flow is in the graphite modeling toolbar, and I'm in edge mode right now. So I'm going to click Set Flow on the loops that I've selected. So I'll go ahead and select another one here, select that, and choose Set Flow. And you can notice that it begins to add curvature back into our topology. It kind of respects the neighboring normals and kind of smooths out that flow of those edges and brings curvature back in there. The next thing I want to do is I kind of want to add volume to our topology here. And to do that, I'm going to use some of our freeform tools. I'm going to go ahead and use Relax and Soften to start off. Now, I went in and I did some Swift looping earlier just to add those things in there. And now I kind of want to clean it up a little bit. So I'm going to use Relax and Soften to just kind of give me a better spacing of these polygons and just some nice clean geometry. I'm also going to use Push and Pull just to add some of the volume back in that I kind of eliminated when I was using the Relax and Soften tool. So we're just adding some back in. And this is not to, we're not going to be replacing our Mudbox sculpting with that. We're just adding volume back in just to help redefine and further define our character there. So now that we've got that in there, let's take a look at another component of modeling, polygonal modeling, that I like is strip modeling and conform. So I'm going to pop over to a different version here. Now, we saw the underlying texture that's kind of the rough-in texture for Sven Straps. We're currently in the design phase, kind of experimenting with a couple of different methods to actually create the straps that Sven is going to hang some of his hardware from. So what I've done here is I've used a tool called Strips, which allows me to basically generate topology or generate polygons on top of a topology here. So I've just drawn in a bunch of strip polygons there. And what I want to do is I want to use the Conform tool to press them against the underlying Sven topology. So what I'm going to do is I've turned on Conform, and we're going to, let me get out of sub-object mode here, select this. We're going to draw on the Sven surface. So we'll select Surface, we'll choose Sven, and then I'm ready to begin drawing. So I'm going to select the straps. We're drawing on the surface, and I'm going to choose Conform. I'm going to set the offset here to be 0.2 so that we can kind of get an idea of what it is that we're going to be looking at. And I'm just going to start painting these polygons, and you notice they're going to basically press right down onto the topology of Sven's body there. And this is a great way to either do retopology of entire models altogether, or in this case here, kind of add add geometric detail in there. Now you'll notice that it gets a little wonky underneath here. We have a couple of different modes of conform. So for example, we have move conform. And what this does is this allows me to translate those separate polygons. This is an entirely separate object. It allows me to transform those polygons directly on top of the underlying topology. Additionally, I can come in here and rotate. So we can rotate those, and it'll further respect the topology that's underneath it. So again, another kind of quick and easy way to add some geometry and get it to conform to that topology. Now we're almost ready to send this over to Craig, but I need to do a couple of other things. Like I said, we're kind of experimenting with an idea here, and I want to try one more thing before we commit to a course of action. You'll notice here that we've kind of set up our loops to match the underline, or to match the texture. This is the rough-in texture that's we've used just to kind of use this for placement. And we're going to experiment with another method of creating those straps. So I'll go into Polygon Subobject mode, and you can see that I've already selected the polygons that mimic the straps that are underneath there. Now, I could easily use a bevel here, for example. I'll just go in and choose a quick bevel, and we can extend the straps out. And if let me undo that real quick. We'll do it one more time. And if I bring it in here, you'll notice that we might get some crossing of vertices, but more specifically, it also gives me a set of polygons in there that I have to deal with, and I'm not really interested in doing that. So I'm going to use a different modifier called push. So I'll get it from my modifier drop-down list. And what push does is push allows me to, in effect, extrude or just push these polygons out away from the center of the model. But the advantage to using this is, I'll go ahead and do that. I'm just going to do it a little bit there. It does not generate these polygons along the center line that I'm going to have to deal with when I do symmetry. So I'm going to actually stick with this method. But you'll notice if I pop out of my smooth and highlight mode, we have some of the topology is still a little bit wonky. It's not really clean enough for me yet. I want to clean that up just a little bit more. So I'm going to collapse my mesh, and we're going to go back into polygon mode. And I'm going to use one more tool that I really like to use a lot, and that is the Geo Poly tool. What the Geo Poly tool does is it takes the selected faces and kind of cleans them up a little bit, makes them a little bit more square or rectangle. In this case, it kind of averages it out. I'll undo that and redo it so you can kind of get an idea of what's going on there. If I were to select a single polygon, it would make it a perfect square. But in this case, it's just kind of cleaning up the topology a little bit so that I can, when I do hand this over to Craig, he gets a much better surface topology to begin working on in Mudbox. So I'm going to go ahead and add our Symmetry Modifier and get ready to send that over to Craig. So we'll choose drop down there to Symmetry. And I still have a couple of gaps in there. I'm going to zoom out a little bit just to grab our mirror. Drop down here, choose the mirror, bring it a little bit tighter, and we're about ready to do that. Now, one of the things about the Digital Entertainment Creation Suite, or the Digital Entertainment Creation tools that we have, specifically within the ECS or the Entertainment Creation Suite, a lot of words, is our FBX backbone. We are going to be using FBX as kind of the constant communications pathway between Max, Maya, Mudbox, and our entire studio process. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. I'll do File, Export. I'll just export this entire object, and I'll overwrite the one that I did yesterday. And here's our FBX dialog box. Now, we can choose the defaults for Autodesk Media and Entertainment, but in this case, I actually want to make sure that we embed the media, which are the textures that we're going to send over to Craig to use in Mudbox. So when I'm all set with my settings, in this case, geometry, whatever else, we've got that all set up. We're good to go. I'm just going to say OK, and it'll give me a dialog box on some UVs, and I've exported it, and we're now ready to send it over to Craig for him to do some finishing work in Mudbox. So Craig, it's all yours.
Great, thanks, Chris. So with the Sven character that Chris was just working on there, for Hyperspace Madness, we extensively sculpted and textured him amongst other assets for this game. As you can see from the concept art that it has a lot of these fine line details in here. So we're going to take a look at how we can quickly work with Mudbox to sculpt up and texture paint some details. I'm just going to turn on my Cavity Ambient Occlusion viewport filter to help visualize the sculpting here a bit. And I'm just using a simple sculpt tool with a basic stamp on here. And I have my mirroring on, and I'm also using Steady Stroke in Mudbox. So Steady Stroke gives me this kind of preview as to where I'm going. I can visualize before I'm actually committing to the sculpting here, so I can guide that along to draw in some of these edges, for example, on these straps here. So let's just turn off that ambient occlusion and jump over to the painting and take a look at how we can work with these kind of finite, tight lines that are on our Sven character here. Jump into my paint tools and just go to the paintbrush. And I'm just going to go to an empty paint layer here. So with my paintbrush, I'm just going to start to paint here with some solid black. And I'll leave mirroring on. And let's just get something really, really tight and finite in here. And all I want to do is start to use Mudbox Paint to rough in this area. So just following the overall concept art in here, I can start to, let's put that up a bit. And I'm actually going to turn my steady stroke on here so that if I use freeform paint, I can, of course, just freeform paint this in. But again, with that steady stroke on my paintbrush, it's going to allow me to get a little more solid, more crisp on my lines here. So I can use that as a lead off and start to just turn up the handle here before I go. And we start to use that to rough in those overall line details here. And we can continue on with this. And just start roughing in some of this detail. So the Sven suit with all of these line details, what we're going to do with those is use these texture painted lines on these layers to actually sculpt from. The nice thing about the workflow here in painting in Mudbox is the connection it has with Adobe Photoshop. So you can see all of our stack of layers and painting layers in here. I can at any time export that channel over to Photoshop. So let's do that. I'm going to export this channel to Photoshop. I'm just going to call this diffuse. Whoops. Put a slash there. We don't want that. There we go. So it's going to write out a PSD format for me. And then it's going to open up Photoshop, and it's going to bring that entire stack of all those textures that I'm working with in that specific channel, in this case the diffuse channel, into Photoshop. And you can see with this back in Mudbox, you can see this little box that pops up. It's established a live connection with Photoshop. So if we're in Photoshop here, you can see that we now have all of these texture layers that have come over that I have already painted up in Mudbox. I can bring right into Photoshop and continue to work with them with all of the tools available in Photoshop. By default, Mudbox is going to lay out a wireframe UV unwrap of your mesh so that you can visualize that and work with that as well. And then what we can do is start to use some of the tools here in Photoshop. So if I'm roughing in a lot of these lines, you can see that I'm not getting maybe the sharpest or most finite lines that I want. Let's just open up the navigator here. So then what I can start to do here is use things like the line tool within Photoshop and start to use those tools just to get my crisp overall lines that I may want to use on there and start to stroke on that surface there. So I can start to get a simple stroke on curve to allow me to get my sharp lines on here. And let's reveal a more finished one. Turn this one off. So with these lines here, the process that I'm using here in Mudbox is that I want to select, just kind of use the magic wand and select some of these areas to fill in. And on this matte layer, I'm just going to do a quick fill in of solid white. And the nice thing about this workflow is back and forth with Mudbox and Photoshop. I'm now just quickly flooding. I'm using the different tools available in Photoshop. And then I'll just hit Control-S, or I'll go into the File menu here just to hit Save. And that's going to save out that PSD file. And back in Mudbox, it's now recognized a change in that PSD file that we're working with in Photoshop. So I'll hit Re-import. And that's going to refresh anything that's changed in that diffuse channel stack. So we can bring that over. We'll let it just, there it is. Let's turn off that paint layer. And we have this simple little white matted out area that represents that portion of his suit that is gray and goes along his arms, down his thighs, down his chest. And what we can start to do is blend a lot of these together here. So here we have the lines, the line detail on Sven, all of that intricate detail, nice and sharp and crisp by roughing it out here in Mudbox and then just using a nice sharp line tool and the pen tool in Photoshop to get it nice and crisp. And then I'm going to turn off, let's turn off this guy. And I'm going to merge those three together. So I've just quickly right-click, merge visible. And if we go down to our, back into our sculpt layers, I'm going to drop a new sculpt layer down. Turn that one off. I can now effectively sculpt based off of my texture map. So we've built these simple white mats, and if I right-click on that and do a freeze from selected, Mudbox is going to calculate an area to freeze, and it's going to freeze everything that is not painted white. So if we turn that matte off, you can see that this area in here is now all matted out, and I can sculpt that. So I'm just going to right-click in the marking menu and isolate that body there. If I jump back into my sculpt layer and go into our sculpt tool, let's turn off the stamp. And let's put a strength here of around 1. And now I can just flood that detail in there. So if I just hit flood, in the bottom left-hand corner, it's going to show that it's flooding this detail out. There we go. And if I just hit a Shift U, we're going to turn off our freezing there. So let's get that turned off. And now you can see I'm only affecting those areas that I painted with. And I have it much too strong. I don't want it that strong. So let's maybe dial the layer opacity down to a layer of 10. And if you're familiar with Photoshop, all of our layers, sculpting and painting, work the same way. The difference is that we can actually go into negative values. So if I hit negative 10 on that, we're now effectively cutting that detail into our sculpted, our body there. So that's a very quick way to get some nice, sharp, sculpted details in there. So let's turn that off and jump back into our paint layers. Turn that sculpt layer off. Another thing that we can do with this matte is we've used that to sculpt effectively the detail in there. We can also use it as a layer mask. So I'm going to take this matte and I'm going to right-click on this and go into my Adjust Color window. We have a bunch of presets in this Adjust Color window, or I can just hit Inverse, make it black. I'm going to use that as a layer mask. So I'm just going to drag it down and drop it right on top of that fabric blue. It's just a simple blue color. And then I'm now masking out that blue. So I have that kind of procedural control here. I can put all these different layer masks in, and at any time I can dial back the overall effectiveness of that layer mask so that I can use that as a simple blending tool. And then if I just duplicate what I've done there, so let's just duplicate that mask and turn on our fabric layer here. I just have a simple fabric layer. If we zoom in, you can see it's just a fabric detail for the cloth effect on Sven's suit. And I'm going to copy that, or just drag that copy onto the fabric layer. So once I just drag it on top and highlight it here in yellow, there, I've now created a layer mask for that one there as well. And that's masking out the area. The rest of this is kind of a rubberized material. And if I jump back on that fabric layer, I have access to all the same blend modes that exist in Photoshop, and they appreciate each other back and forth, so we can work in that way directly. Let's do an overlay on that, and I'm now effectively overlaying that fabric material using the same layer mask that we used to sculpt all that detail onto our Sven character. So let's take a look at one last thing here in Mudbox. If I reveal everything, let's turn off our little guy here. I'm just going to show all so that we have the base body down here. And you can see that what's happening here with Mudbox is it's culling out anything that may grab onto my graphics card for me. So if I'm painting an area that I don't necessarily need to see the rest of it, it's going to cull that out for me. That's what the blue colors were there. So now what we want to do is we want to generate some ambient occlusion maps on this body here. So I'm going to select these objects. Select the armor, his jetpack, and his body. And we'll go into our extract texture map operation here. And I can stack in a bunch of different maps to write out all at the same time. Vector displacement, normal maps, and ambient occlusion. In this case, let's just generate a quick ambient occlusion map. I'm going to use a ray casting method. And if I just hover over top of the sampling method here, we'll get a preview window that's going to show me how I want that to be calculated. I want the closest to the surface. I just want what's underneath all of this armor and jetpack to generate an ambient occlusion on my models there. So if I add all of these to my target and to my source, I can use this to generate the map. I don't want the jetpack as a target, so we'll get rid of that. I don't want the armor as a target. I just want to use all those other objects to generate ambient occlusion on the body. So I'm just, for the purpose of this demo, I'm going to just crank the quality down here, and we'll just keep it at 1K. We'll give our map a name. Just call it AO for right now. And hit extract. And what's going to happen now is Mudbox is going to take a look at all of those objects, generate an ambient occlusion map for me, and I've also selected preview as diffuse, so it's going to drop that right into my painting layers so that I can preview it and continue to blend with all of those different blending options, or edit the texture further in Mudbox or outside in Photoshop if I need to do that. So it'll just take a moment here to extract this map, and this window is going to give us our overall results. The bottom left-hand corner, you can see the extraction progress that's happening here. There we go. Just hit close on that. And if we jump into our paint layers, let's deselect everything here so that it's a little easier to see. There we go. And we'll just right-click on the body. I'll isolate that body, actually. There's our basic ambient occlusion map that represents the ambient occlusion underneath those objects. And now I can multiply that in to the underlying layers. And we don't want it that dark, so I can start to dial it down to kind of blend that a bit. But the nice thing about the way maps are generated in Mudbox, I can generate a bunch of different versions of ambient occlusion. So in this case here, this is just all of the sculpting detail on the body, so I can keep that ambient occlusion map separate to blend into my diffuse painting here. And then we have just a gear map that I'm using furthest outside method, so I can get some nice outlines, and then I could maybe go in and blur that to add to it. But we can combine all of these different ambient occlusion maps in here just to give us a nice overall effect to help us out with our painting workflow. So let's reveal the final maps on this guy. We'll turn on his diffuse paint, his specular map, and I'm going to step him down. We're at 4 levels of subdivision. We're just at around 2.6 million polys on there. Let's go down to the base mesh and turn on that normal map. And there's our normal map with all of our detail extruded, all of our wrinkles painted in, and this little kind of honeycomb effect on his, the kind of gray rubberized area on him there. And now what I can do with this guy is, let's continue on into Maya. Here, let's show the whole character. The way this guy was painted up in Mudbox actually was he was painted at a higher resolution. He was actually painted at 8K resolution so that he can be used in marketing images like the Intel sign over there. That's actually rendered right out of Mudbox, which is kind of cool. And then from here, I'm going to take this guy over into Maya where we can do some character setup. So we have the one-click workflow via Fbx where I can just send this right to the scene. I actually have this guy waiting for me here over in the Maya scene here. And let's take a look at a character setup flow here. So if I turn on my X-ray bones, you see that I can see the joints through my character. Let's take a look at some skinning. So traditionally in Maya, we have the smooth bind method of skinning as well as rigid bind. But the nice thing about working within Maya is you have all these different ways of skinning a character, all these different tool sets. You can use them individually or you can combine them all to get what you want, depending on what you prefer. It's up to your artist preference for skinning. So we have this interactive skin bind tool, which is really nice for just quickly going in and roughing in overall detail. So if I click a bone on here, I'm going to get this encapsulated area that I can start to dial in the overall size of this. Let's just dial this down a bit and maybe stretch this to blend. By default, it's going to give me this feedback color, this kind of rainbow color here. I can set that to whatever color I want. The blue representing the weakest weights, and all the way up to red representing the most weighted vertices on that character for deformation. And using my down arrow, I can just start to pick walk through these bones. And if I hold down the shift key, I can do a uniform kind of scaling of that. So I just want to quickly encapsulate the body on here. And that's the nice thing about this method here in Maya is that it's just a quick, very simple and quick method of encapsulating weights so that you're getting a nice encapsulation based around the bones of influence on there. Another nice thing about the workflow is if I right-click on the mesh and go to my Paint Skin Weights tool, you'll notice I'm accessing everything that I want to work with skin weights is in just a right-click over top of that mesh. So for example, on this bone here, you can see that we have some areas that it's not very smooth, so I'm just smoothing out some of that area. And we can just quickly paint that. And as well, another nice workflow for this is, again, with that right-click menu, I can hit a select mode. And if we just grab our bone here, our thigh bone, and start to deform that out, you see that we have a bit of a problem down here. So again, I could go back in and paint that, but I can also just grab vertices. So select some vertices. And I'm just going to right-click on this. Oh, let's go back into Paint Skin Weights. Select that influence of that bone there. And down here, just below the opacity, I'm going to see a value. That represents the overall average of those vertices that I have selected in their weights. So if I grab this and just dial that in, I know I want them all to that thigh bone. So it's a really quick way just to fix any kind of issues with skinning in there. And you can see that we now have this guy kind of nicely skinned in there. And one last thing related to skinning, if I grab this bone and start to rotate this guy, zoom in a little bit on him here. See, one of the common problems with skinning is this twisting, this overall kind of twisting effect that we can get where we get this kind of candy wrapper twisting going on. And if I grab my skin cluster, we have available here in Maya a variety of different skinning methods. So there's 3 methods available. There's the classic linear, which I'm using here, and we have this dual quaternion method, which is going to preserve the overall volume of your model. So it's not going to allow the volume to disappear when you start to pull bones around. So it lessens that twisting or candy wrapper effect. And the weight blended method can blend between those two. So let's hop out of this guy here and take a look at our entire city. Jump into the whole city in here. You can see this is the environment from Hyperspace Madness. We have our Sven guy down here. And then we have this kind of little simple proxy stand-in that's available. And what's going on here is that all of these buildings are using Maya's reference editor. So I can have all of these buildings somewhere else. For example, with Chris's modeling workflow that he has going on in Max, all of these buildings can be being built in that application and stored in whatever project directory we're working together on. And I can have references that approximate where I want these guys to be. So in this case here, I have a proxy model of our portal model that Chris is now going to go through a workflow as to how he's modeled that. And I can continue working on animation here and update that object when he's finished. So I'll put it over to you, Chris.
All right, great. Thanks, Craig. So we can switch over to Max. We're going to be taking a look at some workflows with our portal model. All right, so we've gotten our portal model in here. We're pretty close to having it done. The geometry, though, is really dense, and it's frankly a little bit messy, so we need to clean it up. Much like we were working with Sven and adding topology and getting clean and efficient topology there, we actually need to go the opposite way here. We need to kind of reduce some of this stuff. But before we can do that, I need to break this model apart. So to do that, I'm going to use a script called Soulburn Scripts from Neil Blevins at neilblevins.com. And I always like to kind of highlight scripts in my work because it's a good demonstration of the 3ds Max's community's passion about the product. There's a lot of free scripts and tools that are available for anybody to use. In this case, I got this, like I said, from neilblevins.com, but you can go to ScriptSpot, or you can go to the area.autodesk.com and find a lot of different scripts that are available to you there. So you can see that I've broken this model up, and we're now ready to kind of go in and begin poly reducing that. So let me switch over to our one that we're actually going to get rid of. So let me actually jump in there, and we'll hide unselected. So this is the model that we're going to be working on, and I could go in and begin to poly reduce it kind of a manual way. Now, we definitely don't want to use one of the modifiers that we have. You know, we have Optimize and Multi-Res, and those modifiers, although they definitely remove a lot of polygons from here, we really lose creative control over the decimation process. So we're going to do this manually. I'm going to show you a couple of quick and easy ways to do that. I could come in here very quickly and just start selecting loops and then do Control Backspace, which is a keyboard shortcut. And that's nice, and it removes the loop, and it also removes the edge that's in between. But that is really not very efficient given how many polys that we need to reduce. So I'm actually going to use a different tool for that. Over on our freeform menu, I'm going to switch over. I'm going to exit our sub-object mode here. And we're going to go ahead and select our new object. That's this right here. And there is a tool called Optimize. And again, not to be confused with the Optimize modifier. This is a specific workflow. So what I'm going to come in and begin to do here is I'm holding down my Control and Shift key, and I'm just going to start clicking on loops to start getting rid of some of this topology. And it basically automates that entire workflow that I had done with the keyboard shortcut. So I can just come in here and make some creative decisions about the loops that I want to get rid of. So I can have all of the creative control that I need, but I'm also keeping nice, clean topology, and that's what I want to do. Now, obviously, I could go on and do that forever because this model definitely needs that type of reduction, but I want to show another version that we want to take a look at. So I'll go ahead and hide this one. And I'm going to jump in over here. This is a little farther down the road. We've reduced a lot of the edge loops by hand here, but you can see that this part of the model has really kind of been destroyed, frankly. And we need to reconstruct this. There's a couple of quick automated tools that'll help us reconstruct this. So I'm going to go in here, and I'm going to get rid of the worst offenders first. I'm just going to select this middle portion, and just delete that all together. It's going to leave a hole there that we'll build that up later. But I'm going to go into Edge mode, and I'm going to select this entire loop, and I'm going to use a tool from our Graphite Modeling Tools tab that I like to use a lot in this type of situations. It's called the Loop Tools menu, and it gives us a lot of additional tools and functionality to our Edge commands to clean this up. So, for example, I've selected these edges here. All I have to do is choose Circle. It will automatically regenerate those edges into the shape of a circle based on the viewport that I'm in. So I'll just do this a couple of times. I'll select that and choose Circle. And we'll still have to reposition them a little bit. We may have to still clean up a little bit of our topology. But it's a very quick and easy way to regenerate this circular topology as opposed to going in and trying to eyeball all of the vertices to do that. So again, a good, nice, quick, easy way to do that. Now, before we can send this over to the game, we still need to do a couple of other things, and that is unwrapping. Now, we're just getting into the unwrapping process here. Craig has actually begun work on the high-res version of this model using a UV-less texture painting workflow, in this case called PTEX. So I already have Mudbox open. And if I pop over to Mudbox really quickly, you can see that Craig has already started painting and working. But he doesn't have any UVs. I haven't done them yet. So we're going to kind of take a look at that process in terms of generating UVs here and then transferring the paint layers when we get back over to Mudbox. So I have a couple of different UV unwrap modifiers here just to kind of show you a couple of things about the Unwrap Editor. Back in 3ds Max 2011, the UV Unwrap Editor was completely rewritten, and a lot of the tools streamlined, the UI enhanced so that it has a lot of tools on it. I just want to show you a couple of my favorite things in the Unwrap Uvw Editor to kind of speed the process up. So I'm going to grab these series of UV clusters here, and you can see that it's for that part of the portal right there. And we want to start realigning them and start packing them back into the UV space. And so we have a couple of tools to help automate that process. In this case, I'm using Arrange Elements. So if I just click on Arrange Elements, you can see that it automatically kind of puts all of those UV clusters into a square shape as if it were the UV space, and it's going to get ready to pack them. But you'll notice that they're still oriented a little in kind of a weird orientation. We want to definitely improve that and make them fit together a little bit more. So I can turn on Rotate and do it again, and you'll notice now it's kind of rotated some of the ones that were off angle a little bit and makes them fit together a little bit more. I can then pack them into the UV space in more of a normalized fashion, so they're all packed in there. And now, obviously, we still have to pack all these other things in there, but I've got this portion of my UV clusters done the way I want, so now I want to group them together. And so now they're a locked group. So at any time, I can still have access to the individual clusters, or if I actually want to select the group, I can actually select the entire group of UVs and put them off to the side like that. The last thing I want to show you in UVs before we send them over to Craig is a tool called Peel. This was also recently introduced. And I'm going to go ahead and go into Peel mode. Actually, before I do that, I'm just going to pop into Vertex mode and uncheck the element box. Now I can go into Peel mode, and I'm just going to grab a vertex here. And notice when I move it, it turns into a little blue box. Anytime I move a UV vertex, it gives me what's called an anchor, and I can begin to pull and push the UV cluster in a very dynamic way that allows me to kind of sculpt the UV shape, if you will. And I can realign this out. Now, these are curved UVs. They're very unusually shaped UVs. If I want to, I can have as many of these as I want. I could conceivably make all of those UV vertices a locked or anchored vertex, but I don't want to do that. So I can go in here and just straighten some things out and make it a cleaner overall UV cluster. And notice it kind of dynamically changes that in respect to those UVs. So again, Peel is a great way to do that. So now that we've spent some time with our unwrapping, we need to get ready to send this over to the game, and we need to do a couple of other things. We actually need to send it over to our Mudbox scene to bake the layers on there. So I'm going to go ahead and hide this object. And I'm going to unhide the final version of the model. Everything's back. The UVs are on it. It's ready to go back over to Mudbox. Now, let me just pop over to Mudbox real quick to remind you what's going on here. We have this great-looking model that Craig has actually painted already, but remember, he has no UVs. And, in fact, if we go to the object list and I open this up, you'll see we're at the portal high-res model is in here, but no other model is in here. And we're going to actually send that model over from 3ds Max. So I'm going to pop back over to 3ds Max, and using the one-click workflow that's part of the Entertainment Creation Suite, I can just say send to Mudbox, and we're going to add it to the current scene. So give it a chance to think about that for a second, and it's already done it. I'll pop back over to Mudbox. I'll say OK to that, and we're going to keep all of those models that are in there. Say OK. Oh, I know exactly what's going on here. Same thing I did yesterday. It's all right. We're going to go ahead and fix that really quickly. I forgot to select what I needed to select, so it's not a problem. I can just go into the Mudbox hierarchy here. I can select all of those models, give it a chance to run through there, right-click, and say Delete Object. And we're going to try that one more time. Actually, I think I still have it in there. Portal Material, Portal M1. Nope, we got to bring it over. Easy to do. Now I'm going to select it, so I don't want to send everything over. And we'll just send that right back over. Send to Mudbox, add to current scene. Now we only have one object selected, so this time it'll go right over. And there, oops, there it is. You can see our object is selected there, and over on our object list, it says Portal Game. That has now been selected and moved over. So we're ready to transfer the layers. Now, I'm going to go over to our Layers tab, and I'm going to go into the Paint mode. The low-res version of the Portal model is currently selected. Notice there are no paint layers over on the right side of the screen. I'm going to choose Maps, and we're going to extract a texture map using a new operation here, and we're going to do Transfer Paint Layers. Now, this is pretty interesting because we're not just baking down all of the painted layers from the high-resolution version of the model onto this low-resolution model. We're actually going to transfer everything, the artist's history, all of the layers, all the strokes. We don't lose any of the ability to go back in and re-edit those layers after the fact. So I'm going to add these here. Our target model is, of course, the game model, so we want to remove the high-res one there. And the source model is the high-res model, so we want to remove the game portal, or the portal game model there. We're going to choose ray casting as our method because they're right on top of one another. We're going to choose 1024 as our texture map size. And pay attention to what's going to go on over here as soon as I click Extract, because what it's going to do is it's going to begin to rebuild all of the paint layers on the lower version of the model. So we'll say Extract. And we will go ahead and do that. And it's building it up. Now, while it's doing that, I know for a fact that we're probably going to need to get approval at this point on the model. So I'm going to go ahead and do Fbx Export and just export this as an Fbx file. And I'm going to email my art director, who happens to be Sean Hendricks. And even though he's standing right over there, where are you today?
Cancun sounds like a
He's in
place to be.
Cancun. All right, he's in Cancun on the beach. So now that this has been extracted, we're going to go ahead, and the low-res version of the model is still selected. So I'm just going to say Export Selection, and we're going to call it For Approval FBX. And I'm just going to email this to Sean. And Sean is going to take a look at it using a technology that we're previewing here called Fbx Share. So, Sean, tell me what you think.
Thanks a lot, Chris. So this is one of those perfect little technology previews that I see a lot of use for as the art director slash approver guy who likes to be lazy and be in places like Cancun as much as he possibly can. So basically the goal behind this was often you want to get people to approve models, scenes, animations that don't necessarily have 3ds Max or Maya available to them. They just need to be able to look at it. So using FBX as our standard backbone, Chris has sent it over to me, and we've started working with Microsoft fairly closely around Windows 8 and just kind of think about what could we do with the Metro UI. What are things maybe we could play around with? So this has been some of the experimentation. So here we've got the Fbx Share Metro application, which I'm just opening up. And I'm going to go in and pick on our portal and say open. That's when you see how greasy a tablet gets very quickly. And now what I can do is I'm just going to use pinch to start zooming this down. And there we go. Let me just move it down. It's a little bit phallic at this point, so we're just going to spin it like so. And now you've got the full model that we were talking about on Chris's side now in my scene that I can look at and go, okay, what do I think about this? But what's really cool is when you're working with the Metro UI, they have this thing called Share. And so I can swipe to the side and I have this Share option. When I click it, basically any other apps that are also Metro apps could have sharing links between them. So I can now say, I want to share the content that's in my Fbx Share tool with, say, Sketchbook Pro, so I can mark it up, write down things, say, yeah, this thing is too big, this is too small, and then send that back to Chris. So in this case, we've just got a simple email thing set up, so I can just go and say, yeah, I'm going to share that, and you can see it'll pop up an email, but it's automatically made a screen capture for me from the FBX file. So I can send this to him and say, Chris, this is way too blue. If you could go and just gray this down a little bit, and I just send that off, and away it goes, and is now back in Chris's hands.
Okay, so I've just got Sean's email back, and there were a couple of highly inappropriate pictures, but there was one in there that said this thing was entirely too blue, we need to fix it. So what I'm going to do is we're eventually going to be exporting from 3ds Max to do that. So I actually want to fix that in 3ds Max. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and I'm going to select the high-res version of the model and hide it. I have the low-res version here. We're going to actually send that back to 3ds Max. If you notice in the lower right-hand corner, it says connected to 3ds Max, update. So I'm just going to update that, and it now sends back the model from Mudbox directly into 3ds Max. I'll hit F4, and you can see there is the model with the texture on it that we just extracted in Mudbox. And let's go ahead and make the color corrections to the texture that Sean has requested. I'm going to pop into my Slate Material Editor, and you'll notice that as part of the updating process back on 3ds Max, it still has respected all of the materials that we generated in Mudbox. All of those things are still here. I'm just going to quickly drop in a standard color correction map type, and using our node-based material editor here in Slate, I'm just going to remap those. I'm going to double-click this icon to make it a little bit larger. I'm going to make the window even a little bit larger and adjust the layout so we can see what's going on. And I'll double-click this node. And just to show you that we're getting real-time updates in here, I'll just crank up the saturation just so you can see not only is it changing in the texture, but it's also changing on the model. And I'm just going to dial this down to something that Sean has indicated is more appropriate. Maybe crank the brightness just a smidge. Crank the contrast. Oops, a little too much. Down there, get it a little more towards gray. And I think we're good. So we're now ready to send this back over as an FBX asset. We can either put it in game, or Craig can continue to work on it. So I'll just say export, and we'll do the final portal, and we can take it then wherever we need it. So Craig, why don't you go ahead and pick it up from there.
Thanks, Chris. So back in Maya, working with our reference editor, you saw what Sean was using there on the tablet, using FBX as this backbone for our Arts Engine pipeline. I can take this simple proxy model here, and with all of my references that I have stacked into the scene, I want the approved model, and I'm just going to update that into my scene, and now we can see that we have our simple little portal model that has been approved over with our Sven character. So let's jump in and continue our character setup. I'm going to turn the X-ray version of our bones back on, and we're going to quickly characterize this guy using Human IK so that I can start to animate and edit some more animation over in Motion Builder and then back into Maya here. So we'll create a new characterization. In this case, I'm going to rename this. We'll call him Sven. And the nice thing about this little graphical UI here is the ability to take advantage of grabbing bones and just matching them up directly in the viewport, or using the actual names of the bones as well to match them up. So in this case, I can begin to double click on a bone and swipe it in the viewport and match that up. The green indicating that it's Human IK happy. And I can continue to do this with all the bones here. So that could get a little bit, it can become a very lengthy process if I have to continue doing that with all of these bones. We have in the Hyperspace Madness game two characters that are very similar in their setup. So we have the Sven character, and there's this old spaceman character there as well. We want to be able to share this template across the board. So I can bring in a template that I've already pre-built from another character, for example, and just import that, and it'll have all my bones aligned. The green light in the top corner is giving me my validation status that it's all Human IK friendly and happy. So I'm going to lock that off so I can't do any more edits or changes to it inadvertently. And I'm going to create a simple Human IK control rig. So we'll just hit create on that. Let's turn off the X-ray of those bones and jump into our character controls window. And in our character controls window, we can again either use in the viewport to grab our end effectors, or I can grab them just by selecting a bone here in this UI. One thing to note about the characterization tool and the character controls, exact same technology, exact same UI that you'll see over in Motion Builder. They work identical. They're actually the exact same code. So back here in Maya, you can see that we have body part selectable, so I can just work with a specific portion of the rig. Or if I select full body IK, I'm affecting all of the IK setup here on my character. Let's take this guy and send him to Motion Builder so we can do something with him with some animation. I just have a portion of the rig selected. Once again, via FBX with our one-click workflow, and send this over to Motion Builder. I have this exact same scene set up in Motion Builder so I can animate in context to our game. I'm going to use Add to Current Scene. So once I click that, you'll see in the bottom left-hand corner, we're going to get our feedback there of the export process. We're sending this over, the geometry, all the rigging information, and our human IK control rig. And the connection in the bottom right-hand corner in green connected to Motion Builder. And if we jump into Motion Builder, you see the process is the same. It's connected to Maya, and it's telling us that it has that live connection. I'm going to switch my camera view to my default camera here. And there's our same scene that we're working with over in Maya. In this case, I want to work specifically with Sven to continue with his control rig here. So let's take a look at the control rig. You'll see that it's the exact same control rig that we saw there in Maya. And once again, I can use this UI or the viewport to grab the end effectors. And the viewport, you can see the UI available for characterization and character controls is identical back in Maya as well. So a couple things that we can do here. I can quickly start to retarget animation onto my Sven character. So in this case here, I have a simple jog clip that I want to work with. If I bring that in and just merge it into the scene, and we'll make sure our skeletons are visible so that we can work with those and see them. We just turn around and we have a simple looping jog in place. So I want that to drive our Sven character. That's really easy. I can go into the source menu here, the file menu, and hit source and just drive Sven by that animation clip. And if I hit play, we're going to have Sven just doing an in-place jog cycle. Well, I want to take this and quickly send it over to our animation director that's lazing out on the beach somewhere, probably half bombed, sitting in the sun. And what I want to do is...
now.
Yeah, oh, you're off to Hawaii now,
Yeah,
okay. I'm going to select a portion of this rig. I'm just going to do a quick save selection, and we'll save this guy as our Sven jog, FBX. And I want the media embedded on there so that our tablet can be able to see all that media. And I've gone ahead and sent that over to our director here. I'm going to put this full screen.
So again, I'm back on the tablet. We're looking at Metro UI. And now what I want to show that's a little different on this one is if I go back into Fbx Share and we pull up the Sven clip that he just sent me, loading it up here. So again, I can just move that down, cycle around. Let's make it a little bit bigger. Put it right about there. Now what's nice about this is I have in the FBX file, of course, all the animation data. So if I swipe up, I have full VCR controls for this character, so I can just hit play and see him running inside of my viewport, look at him from every angle. And of course, being the picky director that I am, I can also go and just step forward frame at a time, backwards frame at a time, get an idea of what's going on. You'll also notice over on this end, we have full set of camera choices, so I can flip to different cameras. And also we have the ability to store takes inside an FBX file. So Craig could have exported 20 or 30 different versions of the jog loop that I could then cycle through and get an idea of which one I like the best. So it's a very, very useful way of getting to data without having to have a full Autodesk, Maya, Motion Builder, Mudbox, whatever installed on my system. As a director, I can just quickly look at things and move on. So again, I'm just going to go back into Share and simply click on I want to send an email back to Craig. Here's the screen capture of the thing and saying, you know, I think this guy's going to be working out way too much. He's squatted down too low for the run, a lot of quad workout going on there. So if you're just going to have Craig move the hips up on this animation.
Great. Thanks, Sean. So you can see the importance again with FBX. We're using it through this entire process here. We've just used it for an approval process with our animation director, and he said that he doesn't like the hips being that low. So let's take this animation and quickly bake it or plot it to a rig here so that I can work with Human IK and correct that problem rather quickly. I'm going to create a new animation layer here just with that hips effector that I have selected. With that selected, I'll drop down a new animation layer, and you can see once again, his hips are a little bit low. If we go to the front frame, the top frame, and we'll just adjust that up. We don't really want his knee to lock, so let's bring it down to this area and just drop a keyframe down. And I think that's going to work out just fine. His hips are up a lot higher. We can send this back to Sean for approval, but I feel pretty confident he'll like it, so we'll leave it as that. Now what we can do with this is work with a bunch of different animation clips in the same way, but in another interesting way that Motion Builder provides, and a way to quickly edit animation or string animation clips together. So for this particular scene, if we wanted to work on a cut scene or a cinematic scene here, Motion Builder has some really powerful tools to work with animation. It's quite common in a game's workflow that you'll have a whole stacked library of animation clips that have a common front in and a common end out. That you can tie these clips together. So let's see how we can work with a bunch of these different things. If I just take this jog, once again, we're going to bring it in, bring that jog take in, and we'll have now a front-running skeleton, a forward-running skeleton of that jog that's happening. Well, I want that to drive my Sven character. So I'll just go back to that source menu and drive in that jog, and now we're driving Sven by that animation clip. So I like that. Let's bake that to our rig. Just hit Bake Plot to Rig. And now if I jump down here below, you can see we have our navigator, dope sheet, F-curves, and we have this story window. Well, the story window is much like working in a nonlinear video editing type of format here. What I'm going to use is a character animation track. I'm going to make sure that we're working with our Sven character. So we'll select that. And I'm going to drop down that current take of animation that I've just plotted down there. And if we just zoom into that clip, you'll see that we have all those little tick marks that's representing the keyframes there that we've baked over to our rig. And being in story mode here, we can now start to edit this much like you would in a nonlinear kind of video editing format. And this is great because I can grab all these different kind of clips of animation and just start dragging them in. So I have a bunch of clips here that I'm going to bring in all at once. So let's just work with the jump. We have kind of an edge stop here clip. And with this jump, we have him running, and then we have him kind of doing a jump motion, and that's what I want. I want that jump motion to tie on to the end of this clip so that he's going to effectively jump over those crates. The problem is he's not starting in the same place that the last clip is ending. That's not a problem at all. If I grab the left ankle effector on this one, I'm going to bring this clip in and just butt it right up to the edge of that one, and use our match source tool here. You can see that I have the left ankle effector that I want to match from that previous clip. We have his left ankle is forward on the previous clip, and he's also starting with that a bit forward on the jump clip. So I can use that to match at the start of this selected clip. So let's hit OK. And if I scrub through now, we have him running and the jump continuing from the end of that last animation clip. And now we want to continue to do that same process. I have this little edge stop. He runs up and he stops at the edge. I want the same thing to happen here. I'm going to just snap that into there. With my left ankle again selected, I'm going to do the same thing and quickly edit that so that we have it lining up. And there he is stopping. Another nice thing about this workflow in the story window is the ability to use animation as a simple reference. So I can bring in this jetpack clip, and I want to eventually tie this into my clip here for this cinematic, but the problem is that it's a jarring jump there. So yeah, he's back in a different space there, but we know we can quickly fix that. But we need him to transition from that edge of that platform up there. So let's take a look at how we can do that. I'm just going to blow that clip away for now and reuse some animation. This is the nice thing about the story window here in Motion Builder. I like this jump clip here, or at least a portion of it. I like the launch from here. I don't need the start of it, but I like this launch maybe up into this area. So I can quickly copy that clip. Drag my time frame over and paste that clip down. And let's start to edit this clip so that we're just taking a portion of it. So I don't want that front lead in there. I just want the launch portion of it here. So I can drag this clip and just start to cut it back into this area here. Let's see what we're getting there. So that should do there around that area. And then what I could do the same thing at the back end here. Or I can just simply drag through, and much again like a nonlinear video editing workflow, I can razor or cut that piece. So that's good there. Let's work with this kind of higher up peak portion of it. We'll just hit razor and delete that clip that I've just cut. Now we want to blend this into our animation. If I go to the back here, he ends at that edge, so let's line that up where he's ending. Let's bring this clip in a bit. I need that to end up right where he's starting there. So once again, we'll do the quick match source. And we'll bring it to the start of that one. So there, we now have him running, jumping, ending at the edge, and now he's launching up. But there's a bit of a jarring gap here, the way he drops down to do that launch. So let's do something here with the graph editor so that we can work with that clip. I'm going to purposely leave these guys kind of apart so that we have this little gap to build in that transition in there. So what I want to do is select all of these clips. And let's just zoom in our time frame on that. And then I want to plot these back so I can start to use the character rig on an animation layer as well to do any editing or fixing on there. So I'm going to plot this whole, actually I'm going to create a brand new take here first. So we can preserve that other take. And I'm just going to right click and plot whole scene to current take. I'm going to plot that over. It's going to read through all these clips, and you can see now in our timeline, we have all of that animation baked down to the rig. So we don't need to be in the story mode at all at this time. We can go back to our navigator here and begin to, let's deselect so we can see it a little bit easier. And we can start to work with this animation now in a traditional way with our F-curves or our graph editor for that matter there. So I want to do that. I want to grab all of the end effectors here on this character. I'm just going to grab everything above his feet because I want to change how that gap or that transition happens in the middle. We'll go to the F-curve window. We'll grab all of our translation and rotation, and we'll frame that up. And we can clearly see that gap that I have the issue with that I want to work with. So I'm going to grab all of those frames and just quickly delete them. The nice thing to note here as well, we saw the characterization window, the character control window are the exact same you're seeing in Maya. We can work with the F-curve or the graph editor in the exact same way in Motion Builder and in Maya as well, with now a unified graph editor so that we can share the same process or the same way we want to work in there. So we now have this guy. The last thing we want to do is bring this guy back over to Maya. But let's bring that jetpack in. So I'm going to mute this character track in here and come back into my story mode and bring in a brand new character animation track, and let's just tie in that jetpack flying now. So I'm going to jump into story mode and just drop in that current take. There's all of our animation. We don't need anything beyond this area here. So we can right click and razor that portion out, take it out there, and let's bring our jetpack hover over here. And the nice thing about this is we can do a couple of interesting ways to blend this together. So I'm going to grab the hips to line that up so that the source matches. Grab the hips, and using our match source just with the hips, hit OK. So he's snapping that into place. But again, we have that jarring gap in between. Well, the nice thing about working in the story window is that I can grab this and drag it over and blend that animation together. So we get a bit of that lead up. As he jumps up, he's going to transition into that pose there where he's shooting and hovering with his jetpack. So that's fine. Let's grab both these clips here, start a new take, and once again, bring this over so that we can send it back to Maya here. So I'm going to frame up our start and end of our animation and plot the whole scene of the current take. We'll just bring all that animation back onto our timeline. And there we can see our new clip, our new timeline of animation in there. So we'll turn our story mode off, go back to our navigator, and we just have this guy hovering in place. So let's quickly drop down a new animation layer. I want to have his hips, and I want these ankle effectors selected. And whatever I have selected is going to be affected by this animation layer. So I'm going to create a new animation layer based off of what I have selected there. And if we go through our timeline, we want him to come up, and maybe we'll drop a key right in that place there. And let's drag him forward a bit so that he's actually just doing a slow kind of fly. And now we just have him translating forward here. So that's fine. I want to take all of this animation and I want to send it back to Maya. I want to be able to effectively work with this, continue this in Maya, and then be able to maybe work with some rendering in there if I needed to. So I can take a portion of the rig, in this case the hips, and let's go back to our file menu, and I'm going to send to Maya, and I'm just going to do an update to current scene. And the nice thing about what this is going to do is we have our Human IK rig in here. It recognizes that, but all it's going to add in there is just the animation that we've done over here in Motion Builder. So let's take a look at what we're getting here for our animation. I'm just going to extend my timeline so that we're seeing all of the animation. And we have our character running and jumping. We're working in Maya's Viewport 2.0, and the nice thing about this is that it's actually providing a caching system right now where it's going to cache all of the deformation on this geometry, and then when we play it back, we're going to get a nice, faster performance on this. So we have our character jumping up and then just simply translating forward here. So let's let that happen. And here's our animation with him running through. And now if we jump into our animation layers, you'll see that all of those animation layers that I created in Motion Builder have carried over to Maya here as well. So back in our character controls, let's quickly fix that animation or add a little bit more to it. So I'm going to grab those hips. I'm just going to use the body part mode here. I'm going to grab those hips and those ankles, and back in our animation layer, I'm going to create a new animation layer based off of that. The green light represents what I'm actually animating on, and I want to scrub that timeline so that we're working with this animation in here. Well, he's moving forward, but I want something a little more with this. I want to extend this maybe a little bit. So if we go to this keyframe down in here, let's extend him out a little bit further down so that he's traveling a little bit faster, a little bit further. And then what I want to be able to do is work with, oh, let's actually correct that animation layer. I should have dropped down a key at the beginning of that to preserve the previous animation. Let's do that. So we'll grab that, create animation layer from there, and let's drop a key here as well. Go down to this area, this last keyframe here, and extend that. Drop that keyframe, and if we go back, we now have him moving at a little bit of a faster pace. Well, that's fine and dandy, but what I want to do is work with how he's moving, but in 3D space. I don't want to be limited to a 2D graph editor. And the way I can do that is with my character controls. I'll grab the hips. And the last thing we want to do is underneath the animation menu, create an editable motion trail. I'm going to use a pre-frames and post-frames set at 65. This is going to give me a nice curve that'll generate as my animation goes. And I want the frame numbers to show. So let's create a motion trail. And you'll see now in Maya, if I scrub through these frames here, that we're getting animation curves driven by our character as it goes. So we got 65 frames in front and 65 frames behind. And the nice thing about this workflow is I can work with this in much like a 3D curve system here. So I'm going to drag back this character into here, and let's just drop a keyframe in, and then bring him up into this area, maybe in here, drop a keyframe down there. Now what this will let me do is work with these curves quite simply in a 3D curve space. So I can grab my motion trail, and this is just going to give me a nice preview of what I'm going to get. It's working as a motion path, and if we scrub through, we're seeing our character follow that curve, and then of course I can take this and maybe we want him to go up a little bit, and maybe we want him to go down. So let's leave it at that. So with our character now, he's running, he's jumping over the crates, he's stopped at the edge, and now he's jumping up to that hovering jetpack. And we're using our motion trail here to edit the animation in 3D space here in Maya. So I'm going to end it there. The last thing I wanted to say, you can see throughout the whole process here over the last 55 minutes here that we're using FBX as our backbone for this entire art-to-engine process between Max, Maya, Mudbox, and Motion Builder, and then directly into the Unreal Engine for our Hyperspace Madness game. Last thing to say is go around the wall there and play the game. You can play the actual game, everything that's created with all these tools that you've seen here today. Thanks for coming.